All right, let's jump right into this explainer and unpack the fascinating and frankly ruthless mechanics of perfect competition. We all buy things every single day, but have you ever stopped to wonder how prices are actually born? Today, we're going to dive into a beautifully unforgiving economic environment. We're going to decode exactly how these prices emerge, how tiny firms manage to survive against seemingly impossible odds, and what happens when the dust finally settles in a perfectly competitive market.
To set the stage here, we really need to understand that in perfect competition, an individual business is essentially just a tiny drop in a massive economic ocean. Picture a single wheat farmer. No matter how much wheat they grow or how little they produce, they simply cannot change the global price of wheat. Their share of the total market supply is just too negligible. They are entirely, 100%, at the mercy of the market. And so that brings us to the big, compelling question that's going to drive our entire exploration today. If you're a business owner and you literally cannot raise your prices by even a single cent without losing all your customers to identical competitors, how do you actually manage your business? How do you survive, let alone thrive?
Here is our roadmap for today. First, the industry sets the price. 2, short-run profit scenarios. 3, the shutdown point. 4, deriving the supply curve. And 5, the long-run reality.
Okay, Section 1. The industry sets the price, the macro view.
This dynamic perfectly illustrates that drop in the ocean metaphor we talked about. Notice the massive aggregate industry at play. You've got millions of consumers and thousands of firms interacting. Where total market demand intersects with total market supply, an equilibrium price is forged. Let's just call it price OP. Now contrast that massive scale with the individual firm, which has to take that equilibrium price OP as an absolute, unbreakable law. The firm's demand curve is perfectly horizontal. They are a pure price taker. At this exact price point, price equals average revenue, and it also equals marginal revenue.
So here is the absolute secret formula for survival. A firm maximizes its profit only when the cost of making one more unit, the marginal cost, exactly matches the revenue that unit brings in, the marginal revenue. Since the firm can't change the price, their one and only superpower is deciding how much to produce. And this rule, MR equals MC, well, that's their absolute North Star.
Moving on to Section 2. Short-run profit scenarios, the micro view. Now, check out this shaded region. This represents what economists call supernormal profits. Look at where the marginal cost curve intersects the horizontal price line at point E. This dictates the firm's output. Now trace a line straight down to see their short-run average cost. Because the price line sits nicely above the average cost curve at this specific output level, the firm is making pure, supernormal profit, which is visually represented by that wonderfully shaded rectangle. They're bringing in more per unit than it actually costs them to make it. But let's flip that scenario. Market prices can absolutely tank due to forces completely outside the firm's control. If the market price falls so low that the firm's short-run average cost curve bows entirely above the price line, well, the firm incurs losses. Even when they perfectly optimize their output, where MR equals MC at point E, their total costs simply exceed their total revenue.
To really lock this in, let's look at this summary table. It clearly lays out the 3 distinct realities a firm might actually wake up to in the short run. They might enjoy supernormal profits if the market price is high. They might just be scraping by with normal profits where price perfectly equals average cost, meaning they're covering all their expenses, including a baseline return for the owner, but making zero pure economic profit. Or, tragically, they might be facing straight-up losses where the price is just too low to cover their average costs.
Which brings us to Section 3. The shutdown point, survival or surrender. Before we get into the complex chart, let's quickly contrast just breaking even with the devastating shutdown point. At the break-even point, a firm covers all of its costs, both fixed costs like rent and variable costs like raw materials. But what if they can't? Well, in the short run, a firm will actually keep operating even at a loss, as long as the price at least covers their variable costs. Why? Because you have to pay rent anyway. If selling your product pays for the materials and chips away a little bit at that rent, you stay open. But if it doesn't even cover the materials, that is the shutdown point. Take a close look at point E0 right here. This is the visual representation of that terrifying moment. At price P0, the firm's revenue curve is just barely scraping the bottom of the average variable cost curve. If the market price drops even a fraction of a cent below this exact intersection, the firm has to halt production entirely. Because producing absolutely anything would cost more in variable day-to-day expenses than it brings in.
every single unit sold would just be digging the hole deeper.
All right, Section 4, deriving the supply curve, connecting the dots.
By connecting these equilibrium points at different price levels, we literally map out exactly how much a firm is willing to supply as the market fluctuates. Look at how the price rises from P0 to P1 to P2 and P3. At every single step, the firm finds the new intersection of price and marginal cost, E0, E1, E2, E3. If we map those exact quantities on a separate graph, we generate this beautiful upward-sloping line.
So the big takeaway here is that a firm's short-run supply curve isn't just some arbitrary line. It is literally just its marginal cost curve, but with one massive caveat. It's only the portion of the marginal cost curve lying above that critical shutdown point. Below that point, the supply is zero. The firm just packs up and goes home.
Now, earlier, we saw a firm making supernormal profits, that nicely shaded rectangle of pure gain. But let's pause for a second and ask a really critical question. Does the market just let them keep winning? If you're farming wheat and making huge pure profits, do you think nobody is going to notice? Your neighbors are absolutely going to want a piece of that action.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, the long-run reality, the great equalizer.
The lure of pure profit creates this brutal, unavoidable feedback loop. When existing firms are making abnormal profits, it acts like a giant flashing neon sign to resource owners everywhere else. New competitors rush in to get a piece of the action. As new firms enter, the total aggregate industry supply shoots up. And remember step 1? What happens when market supply increases? Prices crash down. And as that horizontal price line drops, those supernormal profits vanish entirely. Because of this relentless free entry and exit of businesses, the ultimate long-run reality forces all of these variables into perfect equilibrium. The price settles exactly at the lowest point of the long-run average cost curve. Marginal cost equals marginal revenue, which equals average revenue, which equals long-run average cost. It's a state of absolute mathematical balance, meaning firms earn exactly normal profits, nothing more, nothing less. They make just enough to justify staying in business, but not a single penny of pure economic profit. Which leaves us with this final, kind of provocative thought on the elegant yet totally ruthless balancing act of free markets. In a world where your prices are dictated by the masses, where every short-term victory is immediately swarmed by new competitors, and with a long-run guarantees zero pure profit, maybe just keeping the lights on, operating precisely at the intersection of marginal cost and revenue, is actually the highest form of economic mastery. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the mechanics of the world around you.